Good evening, I'm Yodit Tewolde, and this is Making the Case. We're closing in on 1 full month since R. Kelly's racketeering and sex trafficking trial began. After weeks of testimony by more than 10 alleged victims, a jury spent today watching footage and listening to audio tapes introduced into evidence by the prosecution. Press and members of the public could neither see nor hear the tapes or the jury's reaction to them playing. Here are today's developments from Brooklyn.
Part of the evidence that was recovered from R. Kelly's home and a storage unit he owned included iPads and videos that prosecutors maintain provide both audio and visual proof of how physically and verbally abusive he was towards his girlfriends. And some of those girlfriends have testified about that alleged abuse at trial. The federal courtroom where singer R. Kelly is being tried for sex trafficking and racketeering was relatively quiet today. Not because there was nothing happening, but rather because there was a lot for the jury to see and hear. Audio and video recordings were played in court, at least 2 of them dating back to 2008. Only members of the jury, the attorneys, and the lead investigator who helped find the recordings at Kelly's home in Chicago and a storage unit were allowed to watch and listen. So we can't say exactly what the jury saw or heard, but we do know some of the recordings are graphic and sexually explicit. And R. Kelly is seen in some of the videos along with at least 2 of his accusers, who testified Kelly recorded them in various sexually related scenarios. There's also a recording in which prosecutors say you can hear Kelly berating and threatening one of his accusers after he believed she stole from him. Prosecutors say the recordings illustrate the type of physical and psychological abuse Kelly used to exert and maintain control over the women and girls he was engaged in sexual relationships with. Multiple female and male accusers testified that Kelly was controlling, abusive, and sexually aroused by subjecting his girlfriends to doing humiliating things, like having sex with his friends in front of him. And sometimes he would do it as a form of punishment when they disobeyed his orders. Kelly denies all claims against him and has pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors had planned to call a woman they identify as Jane Doe 20 to testify, but they say that she had an anxiety attack and broke down crying after hearing some of the recordings, so they decided it would be best to not have her testify because it was too emotionally difficult. Meanwhile, it's expected prosecutors will wrap up their case by the end of the week, and R. Kelly's defense team may be presenting its case before the jury as early as Monday. Meanwhile, court is in recess until Friday morning. In New York, I'm Dre Clark for Making the Case.
The prosecution's case is winding down, and the defense should be plotting a strategy as they expect to start their case in chief sometime next week. All right, joining us tonight to offer insight into this trial is civil rights lawyer and president of the Illinois Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, Tony Thedford. Tony, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so you have a unique perspective here because you practice in Chicago and you worked closely with the attorneys who represented R. Kelly in his 2008 trial. What's it like watching this all unfold again?
Deja vu all over again. The charges that Mr. Kelly is defending at this point far outweigh the nature of the charges here in 2008 that were tried. I worked along with an attorney, Sam Adams Jr., who was the principal attorney on that case. I was not involved in the defense of Mr. Kelly back in 2008, to be clear. But you know, the fury that surrounded that, the excitement that surrounded that, it was the trial of the year here in Chicago, and to be in this position again where not only are we there, but frankly 10 times in terms of the media focus and the potential consequences to Mr. Kelly. So it's not a good place to be in again, I guess I would say, in terms of reliving a lot of the trauma from our standpoint for a case that was so difficult to defend and deal with. On the other hand, one of the things that's interesting is that I believed that we would never see this again. I believed that when Mr. Kelly was successful in his first case, that would have been, at least for him, warning enough to never, fool around in those areas again, to put himself in that position. But unfortunately, here he is.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk about today's events in court in a moment. But first, I'd like to get your take on the prosecution's case in chief and the defense's efforts to discredit Kelly's accusers. I mean, we're nearly 1 month into this trial. So what's your assessment on how both sides are doing?
Well, I think it's very difficult for the defense. The prosecution has, and you're an attorney, so you know what I mean, has everything in this case in terms of the bulk of the case, the number of witnesses, emotions on their side. You have a defendant who is infamous. It would be difficult to impanel a jury that had never heard of Robert Kelly, or had not heard in some part about the prior prosecution and what his reputation has been for the last 20 years, essentially. So it's very, very difficult for the defense to mount what I believe would be a strong defense with the ability to refute each one of the allegations or to challenge each one of the witnesses who's testified in this case. I know that there's more to come. I know that there was one of the witnesses chose not to testify today because she was emotionally overcome. But I imagine that they will call that witness probably Friday, since they're down until then. So it's a very difficult case for the defense, with very limited, frankly, defenses to a case like this, with this number of allegations and this number of witnesses over such a large period of time. Just extremely difficult.
Now, the prosecution was expected to wrap its case on Monday, but they're still presenting evidence. Jurors were originally told that this entire trial would take about a month. What impact could a longer trial have on jurors and to both sides?
Well, as a defense attorney, it is difficult when a prediction about the length of a trial is made. Sometimes we fear as defense lawyers that any extension of that trial is held against the defendant. And sometimes I'm sure that could be the case. I think that reasonably, though, the trials that we've been conducting, and I say we and the criminal justice community have conducted since the beginning of the pandemic, have been limited. They've been slower because of COVID protections. They've been disjointed in a way because of how we have to set up courtrooms now in order to attempt to socially distance people. So I think that the court's prediction about how long it would take is a bit unfair in that there are these other factors that don't typically happen in a trial that extend the case. But time is not on the side of R. Kelly and his defense team, in that the longer this case goes on, as you indicated, the worse it seems to get because of the accumulation of sympathetic witnesses and the descriptions of these things that they claim happened to them, and the kind of vivid detail that they've given to substantiate that. And now today, we have videos and audio tapes that sort of bolster or support, again, many of those claims.
Well, Tony, speaking of video and audio, after weeks of emotional testimony, today jurors heard from Kelly by way of that audio and video. They heard Kelly allegedly berating and threatening one of his accusers after claiming she stole from him. Talk about the significant impact of video and audio for a jury.
Well, the defense has the option of not calling R. Kelly to testify in this case. My guess is that he would not testify. In light of that, it's almost on some level unfair, because as a trial strategy, often when you want to keep your client off the stand, or the defendant does not choose to testify. But hearing his words unattached to his face, as it were, is actually creepy on some level, especially when you've had a trial that essentially has the substance of this case. So I don't think that it's good, first of all, to even hear his voice. Second of all, it's framed in this limited sort of, look, I told you he was a mean guy sort of thing, where they're only playing snippets of what he might have said or what he did say, of course, in those circumstances where he was being recorded. So it's, as a defense attorney, I would certainly argue that those statements may or may not have been taken out of context, and then try to frame the context in which those statements were made. However, that is difficult to do unless you put R. Kelly on the witness stand. And so they're kind of in a catch-22, frankly, where they may be forced to call him to refute what we've heard in those video and audio. So it's going to be interesting as to how they intend to proceed with that really salacious evidence coming in today.
Tony, last question. I've asked this question too, time and time again, to my guests who talk about this trial with me, on why this trial isn't getting the kind of attention that the trials of Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby received.
That is a great question, and something that I haven't really considered, but let me take a stab at it. I think, first of all, we've done this already with R. Kelly. R. Kelly was already assumed reputationally to be a pedophile or a sex offender of some sort who got away with it. Again, I'm not sharing my opinion. I'm simply saying that's, what people tend to think about him. And so he's really been in the news since the early 2000s, almost 20 years, with either specific allegations or something in the ether about his behavior. Then again, he was charged in 2002 in a state court here in Illinois. That case was tried in 2008. So again, his reputation as someone who might be prosecuted for these sorts of offenses is not a new thing. I think the other piece, I think people are tired. I think that we've had a lot of bad news over the last year. If you combine COVID, the front end of that was, again, the Weinstein trial. And we've also had the Epstein circumstance. So, and obviously Bill Cosby and his recent release from prison based on the appeal. So I think that there's a lot of exhaustion, and so people may not be paying as much attention. And ultimately, I think there has to be some consideration given to the fact that he's a black man being tried, and oftentimes they don't have the same eyeballs on a defendant in his circumstance, potentially because of his race.
Well, what I do find in common with all three of these cases, they were all media was shut out, the public was shut out, and all you had were sketches. But the difference that I find with all three are the victims. In this case, R. Kelly has mostly black women. And so I think for that reason alone is why we're not seeing a whole lot of headlines about this trial. But thank you so very much, criminal defense and civil rights attorney Tony Thedford, for your time tonight.